Now I'm going to show you quickly how you can build a pivot table out of this dataset in seconds so that you can quickly change the pivot table layout and filter by the slicer beside the table. Before we build the pivot table, we need to convert this dataset into a table by selecting Insert, Table, or simply press Ctrl T. Here it says, where is your data for your table? It highlights all the dataset within the range. And next one, my table has headers. This indicates that the first row is the headers of your table. So I'm going to leave the check on and click OK. And now, as you can see, this is turned into a table with headers and shaded and unshaded rows. Now let's assign a name to this table. Let's click Design. In the table name, we can say Data, Enter, and click the table, Insert a pivot table, or you can simply use the keyboard shortcuts Alt and V. Once we click the pivot table, here it shows the table range name is Data, which is exactly the same table we have named. And we are going to leave the check as it to put the pivot table into a new worksheet. Everything else stayed the same. Very easy, and click OK. On a new sheet, we have this range area for you to build that pivot table. On the right hand side, you have 4 fields, which comes from the 4 columns of your data. We have state, month, category, and amount. First, let's drag the category to rows because we need to have the income statement starting with the items or categories in column A. And then all we need is just drag and drop amount to values. It's that simple. And then we have this income statement. Let's look at the income statement, the final result we need. We have income statement title. We have revenues, the first line, and then second line is less cost of sales. So we can fine-tune on our report. First, we can change the row labels into income statement. Enter. And let's find out the revenues, which is alphabetically listed at the bottom. Let's drag it to the top. We can select revenue and then drag to the top. And then sales, cost of sales. Then let's look at our pivot table. Third line is gross margin and then overhead, labor or expenses, and then EBITDA. So let's move gross margin, click, and then move to the top. And then we have overhead, labor, below gross margin, overhead expense, below overhead labor, and then EBITDA, and then depreciation and amortization, interest, and then EBITDA. We can move interest up. And comparing with our final income statement report, we can see for all those costs, we put in less, colon. So let's go back to the pivot table. Cost of sales, we can simply click the cell and type in space, less, colon, space, enter. As you can see, we can quickly change the row title of each income statement. And we are going to do the same for the remaining expense items. Okay, we just customized the expense rows. Now we find out that we don't have the rows for taxes. As we can see, less income taxes. Let's copy this one and create one row because this is a calculated row. So in pivot table, can we add a formula below EBITDA to insert the less taxes? Yes, we can. Let's select this row, any row, and click Analyze, Fields, Items and Sets, Calculated Item. Item means rows, and calculated fields means column. So calculated item. The name will be, as we copied, less income taxes. Let me put 2 spaces in there. The formula will be EBITDA times 30%. That's defined percentage for income taxes. And then add. Okay, so now you can see this calculated rows is input in there. However, when we look at this pivot table, we see grand total. This grand total is simply a sum of everything above, which we do not need. All we need is just one last item, a row called net income. So can we also add another row called net income? For sure. Let's select net income and copy this one. By practice, you can also type in net income by yourself. So in here, let's select any row and click Analyze, Fields, Items and Sets, Calculated Item. Let's add another formula for net income. Paste, Control V. The formula will be EBITDA minus income taxes. Or you can do EBITDA times 1 minus 30%, which will give you the same result. Okay, now we have net income. And here we do not need this grand total row. Is there a way to take that out? Yes. So under Design, Grand Totals, let's select all for rows and columns. Now it is gone. And we want to emphasize the last row. We can select the last row to bold it. For the numbers, we want to only show the dollar values without any digits. So we can select any cell of the values, right-click, and click Number Format. We are going to select Number, use 1000 separators, no decimal places. Let's click that and click OK. And we can also do some final touch on the lines. We can add a accounting lines, double lines at the bottom. Well, that looks like to be very similar to the income statement that we have. And here, if we want to have the income statement side by side for each state, we can go back to our pivot table, and here we have the state field, and drag and drop into the columns. All of a sudden, we can see the income statements for each individual state side by side. And if you want to have the total on the right column, let's simply select Design, Grand Totals. We just mute all the grand total, but for this purposes, we want to add the grand total at the last column. So we have to click this on for rows. This is very tricky because you want to add up the grand total for each rows. That means the grand total stays in one column. So let's click on for rows only. And now we have the pivot table for the income statements for all states. And one more trick we want to add is the slicer, so that you can click and click several slices to have the income statements with the new grand total. So let's go back to our pivot tables, select the pivot table, and then Analyze, Insert Slicer. And here you have the choice of select any columns or any combinations of the column as the slicer. In our case, we want to select the state so that we can pick and choose each state and click OK. And that's it. If you can select New York, Texas, or you can click and hold and highlight several other states, or you can click one and press the control button to select whatever states that you want, or you can click the top right corner to clear the filter so that you have the numbers for all states. Done. Good job.